Um, Given the fact that we could be facing a double-dip recession, what, which will cause tremendous problems for our city, not maybe the same as some of the other cities in the United States, but definitely will have a huge impact here. What particular skill and what particular vision do you have if you were elected mayor to lead us through that? And I'm not saying solve the problems necessary, but what would you bring as a leader to the table for your constituents of San Francisco?
Well, I think that your premise is absolutely correct. We are, in fact, going to be hurting for a couple more years. The reality, the state of California just does not have the money, and as a result, the effects have now started to, in a major way, trickle down into the local level, where we are realigning a whole series of services, public safety, healthcare, and also social services. And that's going to further impact the general fund. And I think the tolerance for people here in San Francisco to start raising more revenues. So given that, I think we've got to think outside the box. And I think there's a couple of things that I think we ought to do. I think we ought to maximize the ability of expressing art in other ways besides just simply having grants that we allocate for different nonprofits. As I think I said in the forum, one of the ways that you can express that is that a number of the public buildings and private buildings that are being developed, that are being constructed, ought to have an element of art in that building itself. Because most of our buildings now are not iconic. Most of our buildings are just simply 4 walls slapped together, and that's basically it. And I think that it ought to, have some artistic element in the building itself. So as you all are looking at the development of different buildings, we ought to then engage some of you in helping the developers to figure out, how do you express that art in there. As I said, it's not about just simply in the lobby putting a bunch of sculptures and pictures, and then we have fulfilled that. So I think that's one area. I think the other is that we need to begin figuring out how do we expand the economy. And we got to expand it in this sensitive way so that we don't end up, building a whole lot of new businesses that may negatively impact our environment, impact the sense of who we are as a San Franciscan. So I think that we've got to then start looking at how do we expand and how do we get people to come into San Francisco and live. By bringing those individuals into San Francisco and live, and by expanding our business base and our economic base, then we can in fact generate more revenue, new revenues, and so on. And then for the new revenues that we get, that we then dedicate some of those dollars into arts. And that's where you get the infusion of new dollars. And then I think at some point, we ought to revisit the hotel tax. I'm not opposed to that. And sitting down, I think, with the tourist industry, the hotel industry, and helping them understand how an incremental increase in those resources can come back many-folds to help maybe offset any of those increases. I think it's a worthy discussion to have, and I'm prepared to push that agenda, push that envelope, and have that discussion.
Time for 1 or 2 questions. No? Cool.
Well, can I just say one more thing then?
Go ahead,
I have
of
one
course.
more observation. Because I was just in Cuba, and I don't want to, over glamorize Cuba, although I do have a place in my heart for what happened there. But there is an amazing phenomena there there's an enormous arts infrastructure and massive creativity going on all the time among very poor people, but very highly educated. And there might be some kind of idea off of what was the morality of the 60s that Jimmy Carter tried to reinforce, which is less is more. And instead of us always talking about, I mean, clearly there's a huge divide in this country and in this city between the very wealthy and the very poor, and it's getting worse, and we all know it. We all say it all the time. But there might be some kind of mayoral leadership that could lead through this next period that we're going to go in that would re-inspire us to not be so desperate for material resources and more, and then we start to spread the wealth and share and go really organize a grassroots community thing in every single city, which is what you feel when you're in Cuba.
Well,
Yeah.
if I can just kind of comment on that,
Yeah.
I think that is exactly what I am looking at. I think that there are always going to be the symphonies, the operas, and so on. But I think the heart and soul, at least for me, about arts is not that, and I could get in trouble by saying that, but for me, it is that one individual that has a home either in the Mission, in the Sunset, in the Richmond, Potrero Hill, whatever, that is doing his or her art. And that individual, because of that creativity, needs some support that is out there, needs a sort of helping hand to say, it's okay to do what you're doing, and there are individuals who are going to acknowledge that. And so that's where the affordability comes in place to allow that individuals to do that. And then it is also trying to find a way that we can get this individual some kind of attention, some kind of notice and so on. And I think that when you start building that kind of an infrastructure, and not in any fancy way, but just simply helping that individual know and recognize that there are people who want to do what they can to help you continue that particular art. When you start getting a couple of these individuals, feeling that, then they start blooming, they start blossoming. And that's the interest that I have. And then you get people, coming from Portland, coming from wherever, wanting to kind of go through the nooks and crannies of our community and our neighborhood and discovering that. That's the kind of sense that I want and that I feel. So that when people come to San Francisco, they're not going to just go to Court Tower, they're not going to go Fisherman's Wharf and so on. They're going to come into the Mission, they're going to go to Inferno, because there's a sort of a community there.
Thriving culture.
Exactly. That you can see and so on. I mean, you walk down 24th Street, you see all the murals and the vibrancy of that and so on. And we just got to duplicate that in so many other areas in San Francisco. And that's the kind of dynamism that I want to see, so that little kids can get out of their house and see arts all over the place, and that's what I want to see.
That's great.
Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.